What is your most unsettling and inexplicable childhood experience? My sister and I had been in a prank war for about a whole week. You know how it is, hiding in the shower, putting weird stuff in the food, that kind of thing. But anyway, we finally decided to call a truce, because my birthday was in just 2 days. I had just turned 11, and that night, while I was in my bed, I heard the closet door open perfectly. In my child's mind, the first thing I thought was, wow, so my sister wants to break the pact and prank me on my special day, huh? I felt so smart. I knew she had snuck into the room and that she had surely forgotten that the closet door always creaks when you move it. My plan was brilliant. Or at least I thought so at that age. I was going to jump up and push her to give her the scare of her life. I was holding back my laughter, thinking I was a genius. I started to sit up very slowly so as not to make a sound. At that moment, the figure came out of the closet. But it wasn't my sister. My sister didn't have very long black hair, her face wasn't covered in scars, and she wasn't as tall as a grown woman. I was completely paralyzed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call for help, but my voice wouldn't come out. I just stayed there, frozen, starting to sob and cry in absolute silence. The fear was so intense that I couldn't even breathe properly. That woman looked me straight in the eyes. She put a finger to her lips and let out a very soft shh, asking me to stay quiet. Then, with a calmness that gave me chills, she walked toward my window, opened it, and crawled out of it. She closed it carefully from the outside, and I never saw her again. At first, because of the way she appeared and how she looked, I was convinced it was a ghost inhabiting the house. But now that I'm older and I think about it with a clear head, I'm sure it was nothing supernatural. It was probably a woman under the influence of some drug or someone with severe mental health issues who had broken into my house and hidden in my closet, waiting for the right moment to leave. It terrifies me to think about how long she was in there, watching me while I slept or played in my room, just a few feet away behind a wooden door. That night, I learned that real monsters don't need chains or white sheets. Sometimes, they just hide in your closet and ask you to be quiet before leaving through the window. I was lying in my bed one night. Everything was completely dark, except for a little bit of light coming in under the door from the hallway. My mom was staying with me in the room because we had just moved in, and she was sleeping on the floor. Suddenly, I looked up and saw the door opening very slowly, making that typical wood creaking sound. Little by little, an older woman poked her head around the edge of the door. She stared at me for a moment, and then simply retreated. My first thought was that I was having a horrible nightmare. I turned over as fast as I could and dove under the covers, hoping it was all a dream, and that when I woke up, nothing would be there. I was lying there trying to convince myself that I had imagined it. But then, I will never forget my mom whispering to me, "Did you see someone look through the door?" My blood ran cold. In that moment, I knew it wasn't a dream. Needless to say, we didn't sleep at all for the rest of the night. We were both just there, awake and terrified in that new house. I grew up in an extremely poor area of western South Dakota. To give you an idea, the county where I lived was larger than the entire state of Delaware, but it barely had about 30,000 inhabitants. The isolation there is something you can't explain. It's just land and silence for miles. When I was bored, which was almost always, I went to the town library. I would start reading any random book to pass the time. One afternoon, I came across a book about local history and read something that made my blood run cold. It mentioned my stepfather's grandfather's property. It said his father had annexed some land in the 1930s during the Dust Bowl era. Those massive dust storms that destroyed the central United States. My grandmother was a woman with money, but easily the most evil person I have ever met in my life. A couple of weeks after reading that, I asked her about my step-great-grandfather's annexation. She only answered me with 2 words: the Millers. She gave me no other explanation, not a single word more. I had to interrogate aunts and uncles to put the puzzle together. It turns out that, during one of those horrible dust storms, a family named the Millers simply abandoned their property. They went to California looking for better land. They told me the site was southeast of our farm, near some small rock formations we called the Breaks. When I asked if the house was still there, they told me no, that it was a waste of time to look for it. But I was a curious kid and I loved history and archaeology. One afternoon I grabbed my bike and went to where I thought the site was. I only found boring plains. Nothing. A couple more weeks passed. I was about 11 or 12 years old. I went out with my bike again and ended up in a sort of V shape between the rocks. I saw what looked like a strange pyramid coming out of the ground. When I got closer, I realized it was the angle of a roof sticking out of the earth. It was almost totally buried. I went to the other side and saw an attic vent. I was more curious than cautious. I ripped the frame off the vent and opened it. There was a lot of accumulated dirt, but otherwise, the interior was almost intact. It was an unfinished attic with one of those old ladders that went halfway down and a couple of holes that looked into the rooms below. I peeked through one of them. When my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I am completely sure that I saw something lying on the floor. I can't tell you what it was, because I got out of there so fast, I think I broke the speed of light. I was terrified. I pedaled back to my grandmother's house, but there was no way in this world I was telling that woman where I had been. I waited a week and told my cousin Brad. Brad was always a limited guy, to put it politely. He told me it was a lie, and that he wanted to see it. I didn't want to go back, but he dared me, and I told him we would go to prove I wasn't a coward. We arrived exactly where I had been. I know perfectly well where it was, but there was no house. There was no roof. There were my bike tracks and my own footprints, but it looked like I had simply spent my time walking in circles on the alkaline soil. Brad mocked me. He told all my cousins I was a liar, and even my aunts teased me about it. But I swear on whatever that this happened. I have added adjectives to many stories in my life to make them interesting, but what I'm telling you happened exactly as I wrote it. It still disturbs me to this day to think about what I saw and where that house went. Cultural note. The Dust Bowl was an ecological disaster in the 1930s in the United States. The dust storms were so severe that they could bury entire houses and farm machinery under feet of sediment in a matter of days. Many ghost houses were literally entombed, becoming underground time capsules that are sometimes briefly exposed by erosion before being covered again by the shifting landscape of the plains. Look, I know this doesn't sound like your typical ghost story, or a killer chasing you through the woods, but it still drives me crazy every time I think about it. It's one of those things that makes you question if we really understand how the world works, or if we're just characters in a simulation that has a bug every now and then. This happened when I was younger. I was at home with a friend, just doing dumb teenager stuff because we were bored. At one point, we started play fighting, but we used pillowcases. We weren't just swinging them in the air, we were really going at it, wrapping the fabric around our hands to get a good grip. I remember perfectly the feeling of the tight fabric in my fist. I was holding mine with a lot of force, and he was doing the same with his. They were different cases, different colors, so it was impossible to confuse them at a glance. We were in the middle of the room, moving back and forth, laughing and swinging. Then, it happened. We both threw a cross swing at the exact same time. It was a fast movement, a full arm swing where our pillowcases crossed paths in the air for a fraction of a second. Logically, according to physics, the cases should have collided, or simply passed each other. But as soon as the movement ended and we lowered our arms, we froze. We looked at our hands, and the silence in the room became incredibly heavy. I was holding my friend's pillowcase. He was holding mine. We just stood there, processing what had just happened. There was no tug. I didn't feel anything slip through my fingers. He didn't snatch the fabric from me, and our hands didn't collide. It was as if, during that millisecond when the pillowcases crossed, reality skipped a frame of animation, and when it resumed, the object simply appeared in the opposite hand. My grip was still just as firm, as if I had never let go of anything. We were both holding the cases with the same pressure as a second before, but the objects were no longer the same. I looked at his face, and he was just as pale as I was. I asked him, "Did you feel anything?" His answer was a flat no. He didn't feel the exchange either. It just happened. We spent the rest of the afternoon trying to replicate the movement. We tried hitting the cases together, letting go on purpose, hooking them. Nothing. It is physically impossible for two people holding something tightly to open and close their hands fast enough to exchange objects in the middle of a swing without either of them noticing or feeling the other person's contact. It just makes no sense. To this day, this still bothers me a lot. Sometimes I find myself staring at everyday objects and thinking about how fragile the logic holding everything together must be. If I could choose just one moment of my life to see a super slow motion recording, it would be that exact second. I need to know if the pillowcases dematerialized or if they simply teleported. It's a mystery I'll take to my grave, and it completely changed the way I see reality. Sometimes, things just glitch. Cultural note. The phenomenon described is often associated online with the term glitch in the matrix, a concept popularized by digital culture to describe experiences where the laws of physics seem to break in inexplicable ways during everyday life, leaving witnesses with a profound sense of disconnection from reality. I've told this a couple of times, and people always give me weird looks, but it's the truth. I had dreams about my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather on the exact days each of them died, without me even knowing they were sick. In both dreams, the setting was the same, a space wrapped in absolute white, as if there were no walls or floor. They were there, surrounded by that light, and it was obvious they were talking to people I couldn't see. My great-grandmother was in a rocking chair, smiling and chatting very animatedly. My great-grandfather, for his part, was smoking a cigar with an expression of total peace. I remember waking up the next morning with a very strange feeling of, what the hell was that? Only for my mom to give me the news that they had passed away. It's as if they had let me peek into their waiting room. Sometime later, I had another experience on a similar plane, but for much less spiritual reasons. I took almost 250 milliliters of maximum strength Robitussin and went to QuakeCon. In the middle of the event, I started to feel my vision tearing, as if the real world was an old fabric ripping apart. I went to the bathroom to try to calm down, and suddenly, I wasn't in the building anymore. I was standing in a white room, a glowing void that never ended. Then an Asian woman appeared in a white robe with a broom. She started sweeping the walls of the void, and as she swept, golden symbols appeared that glowed and then faded away. I walked up and asked her what she was doing. She smiled at me and said, "I am painting the universe again, so that it exists for you once more. I asked her what those symbols meant, but she only replied that I wouldn't remember anyway, and that was the last I knew. The next thing I remember is standing inside the bathroom stall, having intense auditory hallucinations. I heard a crowd clapping and cheering as if I were in a stadium. I got out of there, went back to the computer room, put on my headphones and played Atom Heart Mother by Pink Floyd. I joined the QuakeCon IRC channel and started typing. I have no idea what exactly I wrote, but I felt like I had merged with my computer. I felt like a cyborg, as if I were one with the hardware. It was an incredibly strange experience, but very real. Cultural note: QuakeCon is one of the largest gaming events and LAN parties in the world, held annually in Texas. Robitussin contains dextromethorphan DXM, a substance that in high doses acts as a dissociative, explaining the sensation of being in a white space or outside one's own body, a state users often call a plateau. For a long time, when I was a kid, I was convinced I had a recurring dream. In the dream, an elderly woman in a blue dress and those glasses with the pointed edges, like cat eyes, would sit on the edge of my bed. She didn't do anything bad. She just stayed there and sang me the same song every night before leaving. It was such a constant routine that I got used to her. I never felt afraid. She was just my dream. But one night, things changed. Instead of letting her leave as usual, I decided to follow her. I saw her walk toward my brother's room. The weirdest part was that, instead of her singing to him, my brother woke up and they started chatting as if they had known each other forever. I just stood there watching, until about 20 minutes later my mom came into the room because she heard voices. She asked us what we were doing awake at that hour. My brother, as natural as could be, answered, "I'm just talking to the lady in the blue dress." My mom sent us to bed immediately. I went to my room still thinking it was all part of a very vivid dream. However, the next morning, my mom gave me a serious scolding. She told me she didn't want me getting out of bed in the middle of the night to play in my brother's room anymore. When I asked her what she was talking about, she told me her version of what she saw the night before, and that was when a chill ran down my spine. She had seen both of us talking to thin air, but my brother was responding to someone she couldn't see. From then on, the woman stopped singing to me. But it didn't end there. My brother continued to be caught by other family members talking to himself on several occasions. The most intense part happened sometime later, when an aunt came to visit from the south. She wouldn't even step inside the house. She stayed outside, pale, saying she had seen an elderly woman with cat-eye glasses looking out the upstairs window. She only came in to ask who was upstairs. And when my mom swore there was no one there and let her search the entire house from top to bottom without finding a soul, my aunt went into a total panic. To this day, I am convinced that woman was real and that she truly sang to me every night. I still get goosebumps when I think about those glasses and the blue dress. I don't know who she was or what she wanted, but it wasn't a dream. My family was extremely religious when I was a child. Everything in our lives revolved around the church, so spending hours in services was completely normal for me. Once, during a service, the pastor asked some members to come to the front to pray for someone specific. My aunt stood up and took me with her. I was only about 5 years old at the time. Standing there in front of everyone, we closed our eyes and started to sing, like I had seen the adults do 1,000 times. I raised my hands in prayer. After a minute or so, I clearly felt hands touching mine. It wasn't an accidental brush. I felt someone's palms resting totally flat against mine, skin to skin. I started to sway my hands slowly from side to side, following the rhythm of the music, and I felt how that person followed my movement perfectly, swaying along with me. In my child's mind, I was convinced it was the pastor's wife. She was always very affectionate with me and all the children in the congregation, so I felt very happy and special that she had chosen me to pray together. A few minutes passed, and I was so excited that I decided to break the prayer protocol. I wanted to open my eyes to give her a smile and thank her for the gesture. But as soon as I opened my eyes, I froze. There was no one there. I looked quickly to both sides, thinking that maybe the person had moved fast to pray with someone else, but everyone else was caught up in their own thing, at a considerable distance. There was no human way someone could have moved away that fast without me noticing. I know exactly what I felt. It wasn't a draft or my imagination. Anyone can tell when someone puts their hands on yours and follows your movement with physical pressure. I don't know if this counts as something terrifying, but for me, so many years later, it remains something that has no logical explanation. I wonder who or what was holding my hands in that moment. When I was in kindergarten, my parents enrolled my brother and me in an elite school. We live in South America, where most of the population is brown. But in that school, since it was for wealthy people, almost all the kids were white. I am quite dark-skinned, while my brother is white, so I got bullied a lot. The only one who never picked on me was a boy named Christian. He was very blonde, with curly hair and rosy cheeks. He looked like a church cherub. They bullied him too, I think because of his accent, because his parents were from the United States and weren't from here. One day, during recess, we were playing when the classroom bully came to mess with us. Christian was at the top of the slide, and the guy pushed him to the ground. He climbed on top of him and started pinching him viciously while Christian pleaded for him to stop. I remember perfectly that the bully was squeezing his shoulder with force. After recess, we had a dance rehearsal, and Christian spent the whole time complaining about how much that same shoulder hurt. The next day he didn't go to class, not the next week or the week after that. The last time we saw him was when his dad brought him to the classroom to say goodbye because they were moving back to their country. They were both smiling and looked strangely upbeat, but there was something that left us all cold. Christian was missing an arm. He had nothing below the shoulder, the exact same shoulder the bully had pinched days before. His dad explained, with a catalog model smile that never left his face, that Christian had an accident and they had to amputate the arm. I turned around to see the bully's reaction, and he was just as horrified and in shock as everyone else. That messed with my head for years. I developed an irrational fear of bullies and didn't let anyone touch my shoulders until very recently. I know logically it's impossible for a 5-year-old's pinch to cause that much damage, but the fact that it was in that exact spot, right after that attack, can't be a coincidence. Sometimes I think the pinch aggravated something that was already wrong, or that fate just has a very twisted way of showing itself. Cultural note. In medicine, there is a type of childhood bone cancer called osteosarcoma, which often manifests with persistent pain in the limbs. It is common for symptoms to be noticed for the first time following a minor hit or trauma, often leading to the detection of tumors that were already present, resulting in cases where a seemingly simple injury ends in an amputation necessary to save the patient's life. I have a memory that keeps me awake at night, but it's like a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit. I remember waking up in a room with my mom holding me down firmly. There was another woman there, an older Somali lady, and the only thing I have clearly in my mind is that I was screaming and crying in desperation. The days following that memory are blurry, but I remember the feeling of horrible pain and the fact that I was urinating blood. That is the only fragment I have. The rest of my life before I was 14 is an absolute void, as if my brain had erased my entire childhood. When I ask my mom about it, she gets defensive and swears it never happened, that I'm making it up. But I know something happened in that room. We were living in Kenya at the time. My mom was always a radical advocate for female genital mutilation, while my dad was totally opposed to it. That contradiction is what drives me crazy. If my father didn't allow it, then what did they do to me in that room while I was screaming? Was it an attempted mutilation that someone interrupted? Was it a procedure my mother did in secret and then had to hide under lies when physical complications appeared? My family's nothing happened crashes head-on with the blood and pain my body remembers. I don't know if the intervention was completed, or if it was just a traumatic attempt, but the fact that I have no memories of more than a decade of my life tells me that whatever that woman did to me, it was severe enough for my mind to decide it was better to remember nothing at all. I am trapped between the doubt of not knowing what they did to my body and the certainty that my family is hiding a terrifying truth from me. Cultural note: female genital mutilation (FGM) is a practice that, although illegal in Kenya since 2011, persists in some communities due to deeply rooted cultural traditions. Gaslighting or denial by parents is common in these cases to avoid legal consequences or family conflicts, especially when one parent opposed the practice. Long-term memory loss or dissociative amnesia is a documented psychological response in survivors of severe childhood trauma. Look, I know this has nothing supernatural about it in the end, but it's the best story I have about what fear can do to your head. One night, I couldn't sleep, so I got up and started walking through the house in total darkness. I decided the best thing would be to go to the living room to watch some TV and see if I could get sleepy. I was there, feeling the wall looking for the lamp switch, when suddenly I heard a very weird noise coming from across the room. It was a dry sound, like a metallic whisper or a short hiss. I froze. I remember thinking, what the hell is in this room that could make a sound like that? I tried to mentally go through every object in the living room that could make noise, but I couldn't link that sound to anything familiar. I stood there, petrified, for about 5 eternal minutes. I didn't dare move a muscle because I felt that as soon as I did, some demon hidden in the dark was going to tear me apart. The silence after the noise was even worse. When the terror finally died down enough to let me react, I turned on the TV and the lights to check everything. I looked under the furniture behind the curtains. Nothing. Everything was normal. A few days later, I was walking through the house during the day, and I heard that damn noise again. I ran to the living room and caught a glimpse of a fine mist falling from the top shelf of the bookshelf, shimmering in the sunlight coming through the window. That's when I finally connected the dots. It was a damn automatic Febreze dispenser, the kind that has a timer and sprays every 12 hours. It turns out my mom had bought it just the day before my scare and had put it up there without telling me. I spent 5 minutes in absolute terror, convinced I was going to die in the most violent way possible, all because of an air freshener with a fresh breeze scent. I felt like an idiot, but at least the room smelled great while I was waiting for my death. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, my family and some of my parents' friends organized a picnic in a park. My friend John and I were running everywhere, just being kids, playing tag. He was a bit older. He was about 11 at the time. At one point in the game, we got separated. I realized I was totally lost in the park. I couldn't find my friend, much less my parents. That's when a woman approached me. She was quite tall. She had long, curly black hair, fair skin, and wore thick framed glasses. She must have been in her mid-30s. She looked exactly like any of my parents' friends, so I wasn't scared at first. Initially, this woman just asked if I was lost. I nodded shyly. She reached out her hand and told me she could take me back to my mom. I replied, "It's okay. My friend John will find me." She insisted, "Don't you remember me? I'm a friend of your mother's. Come, I'll take you to her." Again, I told her it wasn't necessary, that I knew John would come for me. That's when she stared at me and said, "Did you know you have the most beautiful eyes in the world?" Even at that age, I knew that wasn't normal behavior. Yes, I was a cute kid, with big dark brown eyes and very black hair, but I knew perfectly well that isn't something a stranger says to you 5 minutes after meeting you. Just as she reached out her hand again to tell me we should go find my mom together, John appeared out of nowhere. He was breathless from running so much. "Where did you go?" he asked. The woman looked a bit nervous. "Who is she?" John asked. "I'm a friend of his mother's," she replied, forcing a smile. "Come on, let's go find her," she repeated. John, who was more alert, grabbed me tightly by the wrist and said, "Sorry, we're playing. Let's go." We ran out of there as fast as we could. A month later, I was at the mall with my mom. As we were walking, I suddenly saw the same woman from the park walking toward us. The same black curly hair, the same skin, the same thick glasses. My mom was the type who always stopped to talk if she saw someone she knew, and yet this woman passed right in front of her eyes. That same woman who insisted she was her friend and that we should go find her, passed by as if she were a complete stranger to my mother. I remember that whole moment as if it were in slow motion. She realized I was looking at her. She noticed I had recognized her instantly. At the precise moment we passed each other, I looked up, and she gave me the most evil smile I've ever seen in my life. She wasn't a friend. She was someone who was about to take me, and she knew that I knew. Cultural note: in child safety, the term stranger danger is used to educate children about common grooming or abduction tactics, such as using excessive compliments or the false pretense of knowing their parents, a technique known as a lure, to gain a minor's trust in public places. Subscribe to the Oracle of Reddit.